Hi, this is Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the wild game hunting riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. On Tuesday, the Liberals made an amendment to their anti-sports shooters bill. The Liberals plan to prohibit all semi-automatic firearms. So now it's an anti-hunters bill. Before this amendment, the Liberals were already committing the most expensive expropriation of private property in history, even excluding the physical costs of the confiscation. Now the price tag is going to be astronomically incalculable. This is before we even add in the price of the handgun freeze. A recent ruling by the Supreme Court of Canada means Canadian taxpayers could end up having to pay for every handgun in the country. They made this amendment the same day Statistics Canada reported gang violence was at a record high. The harder the Liberals and other parties on the radical left crack down on lawful firearms owners, the more gangland shootings occur. Lawful firearms owners don't want this. Canadian taxpayers can't afford this. The only people who support this policy are the urban vegan elites who look down on hunters. Liberal spending is recklessly out of control, thereby intentionally escalating inflation. Canadians need to be made aware of just how much this gun grab is going to cost. That's why I've already written to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Our Conservative team will fight this massive seizure of private property every step along the way. Yesterday was not a good day for the Justice Minister. Several of his text messages were released, and they reveal quite a bit about the mindset of the Liberal cabinet ministers. The most glaring was his joke about killing protesters with a tank. The minister tried to brush off this as a joke. Whether his call for a single tank was a joke or not, his call for the Canadian Armed Forces to get involved was not. He wasn't joking when he suggested the government bring in the Emergency Act after one day of protests. He wasn't joking when he called the police racists. He wasn't joking when he called Ottawa's police chief incompetent. He wasn't joking when he called for ministers to start directing police operations. Both his texts and his testimony revealed a portrait of an arrogant, entitled Liberal. Only a Liberal with zero police experience could presume to know the competency of a police chief with 30 years of experience. We know this type of people who send tanks out to face protesters. They're the type of people Trudeau has openly admitted to admiring. Speaking of Trudeau's favorite communists, there's been a lot of news about communist interference in our elections. So let's recap last week. First, Global News reporter Sam Cooper revealed leaks from senior sources in the Canadian government, which described a briefing Trudeau had received. The briefing said 11 candidates in the last election had been targeted by the communists who control China. Then Trudeau's team then told the paid-off media that Trudeau had raised the issue of Chinese communist interference with Canadian citizens. President Xi then had a public hissy fit and yelled at Trudeau for leaking details of their conversation. The Liberal media invented a narrative about Conservatives taking the dictator's side. This was a lie they made up to deflect negative attention away from the government. All last week, the Liberals refused to answer two basic questions. One, who were the 11 candidates? And two, did the government report this foreign funding to Elections Canada? Finally, after a week of non-answers, Trudeau claimed he'd never been briefed about the 11 candidates who were targeted by the communists who control China. Once again, Trudeau is claiming a story which makes him look bad is fake news. Last time it was in response to a Globe and Mail story which said he'd pressured Jody Wilson-Raybould to interfere in a criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. The difference between the SNC story is that Trudeau denied it right away. Why did it take nearly 10 days for Trudeau to claim the story about communist interference was fake news? If the story was fake news, why did he raise the issue with President Xi? If he did not raise the issue with President Xi, but told the media he had, it might explain why President Xi had a public meltdown. Nothing Trudeau is saying can be trusted. The longer it takes the government to answer honestly, the worse it's going to be for Canadian democracy. What's important to remember is that Trudeau openly admitted he admires the communists who control China. That's why Trudeau appointed Peter Harder, the former head of the Canada-Chinese Business Council, to lead his transition team in 2015. He then appointed Peter Harder to the Senate and named him the government's representative in the Senate. Then there's Trudeau's former ambassador to China, John McCallum. He was forced to resign after undermining the rule of law in Canada. Following his resignation, McCallum had a message for the communists who control China. Quote, "Anything that's more negative against Canada will help the Conservatives, who are much less friendly to China than Liberals." End quote. John McCallum was a Liberal MP and minister before Trudeau made him ambassador. He openly called on communists who control China to influence our democracy to support the Liberals. Then we have the man who replaced McCallum as ambassador, Dominic Barton. Let's read the first sentence in his wiki page. Quote, "Dominic Barton, born 1962, known as Bao Damin in China, is Ugandan-born Canadian business executive, author, management, consultant, and diplomat." End quote. In 2017, Trudeau named Barton to be the chair of the Advisory Council on Economic Growth. It was that council that recommended government create the failed infrastructure bank. For 7 years, Trudeau's been listening to people like Harder, McCallum, and Barton. This China lobby has been more successful at opening Canada to communist interference than the actual communists who control China. These men are only too happy to sell out Canada and our democracy for a quick buck. Meanwhile, Canadians whose parents or grandparents fled communist oppression are being targeted and harassed by secret police working for the communists who control China. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant.